Welcome to the small town of Kapuskasing, Ontario. Kapuskasing was originally built in the 1920s as a model community for new immigrants to come join the new forestry and agricultural economies of Northeastern Ontario. Back in the 1920s, the Canadian National Railway was building a second transcontinental rail line that would go north of the Great Lakes and cut through this region here. Just like how the rail line had a plan to settle new immigrants in the prairies with new land, they thought it would be possible to build new communities in the region here. Kapuskasing is on the easternmost point of what is called the Clay Belt. It's a region that is extremely flat, it's full of thick forests, bogs, muskeg, and it is extremely cold for a big part of the year. So they weren't exactly sure how to build a community in this area. See, the government of Canada had already welcomed thousands of immigrants from Ukraine, Hungary, and other countries that made up the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But the attitudes towards these people significantly changed after the outset of the First World War. These people were now seen as potential enemy sympathizers rather than valuable contributions to Canada. And so the government's solution to this perceived threat was to build and inter individuals at internment camps all across the country. Out of 24 camps, 6 of them were in Ontario, at places like Niagara Falls, Sault Ste. Marie, Kingston, but the largest and most remote of the camps was here at Kapuskasing. At the camp in Kapuskasing, the government had 2 goals. The first, obviously, was to detain people that they thought were enemies against Canada, but second was to use the prisoner labor force to open up this land for new settlement later on. On December 14, 1914, a handful of military personnel and 56 prisoners were dropped off on the side of a rail lining in front of a thick wall of spruce forest, and they were told to build themselves a house. A second train would arrive 2 weeks later, and by the end of 1915, there were 1,200 people interned at this camp and over 250 military staff. With the exception of a few Turks and Bulgarians, the grand majority of the people interned here were from Ukraine. Their job was to clear the land to build an experimental farm, which is the same farm standing behind me today. Their goal was to test crops and see what could possibly grow in this harsh, frigid environment of Northeastern Ontario. The farm behind me and the internment camp itself lasted a lot longer than the war. In 1917, the Russian Revolution sparked a socialist scare here in Canada, and so people like the leaders of the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike were also held at this camp. It wasn't until long after the armistice was signed on February 20th, 1920, that the camp here at Kapuskasing finally closed. 32 men and women died here, most to the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. The memorials and the cemetery behind me are the only physical reminders that this camp had ever existed. After the war, it was widely accepted that this reaction was overblown. It was xenophobia, racism, and nationalism that led to the internment, more so than there actually being a threat of Ukrainian families here in Canada. After all, these families left that empire to come here for a better life. It's unlikely that anyone who is interned here at the camp in Kapuskasing is still alive today, but their descendants, their children, and their grandchildren still remember the pain and the suffering that their forebears had to go through. And many still seek a formal recognition from the government of Canada, recognizing what happened here and the suffering that the Ukrainian-Canadian community has faced. This is a place and a story you might not have known.